it's too expensive to leave versus what you would save and the regulations that you wouldn't have to go through and all the bullshit with all the permits.
California's challenges have sparked intense criticism from figures like Joe Rogan and Mel Gibson, who argue the state is crumbling under poor leadership, excessive regulation, and misguided policies. They point to Governor Gavin Newsom as the central figure behind the state's decline, accusing him of prioritizing optics over effective governance. The frustration stems from a mix of high taxes, overregulation, rising crime, rampant homelessness, and a business environment that's pushing companies and residents to leave. Rogan, who left California in 2020, has been vocal about his discontent, particularly on his podcast, where he and Gibson recently teamed up to call for accountability. They argue that Newsom's leadership has turned a state with immense potential into a cautionary tale of mismanagement. Rogan's critique centers on California's transformation from a land of opportunity to a place where businesses and individuals feel suffocated. He highlights how Newsom's policies, like Assembly Bill 5, have hurt freelancers and gig workers by reclassifying them as employees, leading to higher costs and legal hurdles for small businesses. The $20 minimum wage, while well-intentioned, has forced restaurants to cut jobs or close entirely. Rogan also points to the state's unemployment system, plagued by fraud, which has led to unexpected tax hikes for businesses. He argues that these policies, combined with excessive permitting and regulatory burdens, make it nearly impossible for entrepreneurs to thrive. For Rogan, the state's leadership has failed to support the very people it claims to champion, driving businesses to states like Texas and Florida, where the environment is less hostile. The homelessness crisis is another sore point. Despite California's wealth, 10 cities have taken over parts of Los Angeles and San Francisco with little progress toward solutions. Rogan and others see this as a failure of leadership, where progressive ideals have led to bloated government initiatives that deliver minimal results. Crime, too, has surged in major cities, further eroding quality of life. Critics argue that Newsom's focus on performative gestures, grand speeches, and carefully staged appearances does nothing to address these pressing issues. Instead, they claim he's more interested in burnishing his image for a potential 2028 presidential run than fixing the state he governs. The pandemic response under Newsom's watch is a particular point of contention for Rogan. He argues that prolonged lockdowns devastated small businesses, fueled a mental health crisis, and disrupted education, particularly for disadvantaged children. Mask mandates and other restrictions, in Rogan's view, were more about political theater than science, with little evidence to support their effectiveness. He accuses Newsom of silencing dissent and ignoring data that didn't fit the narrative, creating a climate where open debate was stifled. This, Rogan says, exposed a deeper flaw in progressive governance, a preference for control over practical solutions. His frustration led him to advocate for voting Republican, a stark departure from his earlier political stance, driven by what he sees as Newsom's catastrophic mishandling of the crisis. Gibson echoes these sentiments, focusing on Newsom's response to civil unrest, particularly during ICE protests that spiraled into violence. He accuses the governor of failing to protect communities, allowing looting and property destruction to go unchecked while siding with protesters for political points. Gibson argues that Californians wanted safety and order, not grandstanding, but Newsom's inaction left cities in chaos. He calls for the governor's removal, framing his leadership as either incompetent or deliberately negligent. Actor Jon Voight also joins the chorus, criticizing Newsom for deflecting blame and failing to address the destruction caused by unrest. Voight dismisses Newsom's leadership as performative, accusing him of chasing personal ambitions while neglecting the state's needs. Newsom's handling of recent wildfires has only intensified the criticism. Rogan points to the governor's demeanor during press conferences, smiling and discussing land use policies while communities suffered, as emblematic of his disconnect. Rather than offering concrete solutions, Newsom's focus on speculative issues like property speculators struck critics as tone-deaf. In contrast, Rogan recalls former Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger's direct approach to crises, owning problems and working to solve them without spin. Newsom, by contrast, is seen as prioritizing media optics, even dining maskless at high-end restaurants during the pandemic while enforcing strict mandates on others. This hypocrisy, critics argue, underscores a broader lack of accountability. The state's economic challenges are a recurring theme. California, once a beacon for dreamers, now faces an exodus of businesses and residents. High taxes, coupled with a regulatory maze, make it difficult for companies to stay. Rogan notes that the only reason more businesses haven't left is the logistical difficulty of relocating. If it were easier, he argues, the state would see an even greater mass departure. The middle class, too, is feeling the squeeze with a cost of living that's increasingly unaffordable. Critics like Rogan and Gibson see this as a betrayal of California's promise, a state blessed with innovation and talent, now struggling under the weight of poor governance. Newsom's defenders might argue he's navigating a complex state with competing interests, and his progressive policies aim to address systemic issues like inequality and climate change. But for critics, these efforts are overshadowed by their real-world consequences, policies that sound good on paper but fail in practice. The governor's rhetoric about California's strength, its economy, its industries, rings hollow when businesses are fleeing and homelessness is unchecked. His apparent focus on national ambitions only fuels perceptions that he's more interested in his political future than the state's present. The broader critique extends beyond Newsom to the progressive framework he represents. Rogan and others argue that California's leadership has doubled down on ideology at the expense of pragmatism. From overregulation to virtue-signaling initiatives, the state seems to prioritize image over results. This, they say, has created a disconnect between Sacramento and everyday Californians who face the fallout of these policies in their daily lives. The idea of Newsom as a presidential contender is particularly galling to critics, who see his tenure as a warning of what could happen on a national scale. If he can't manage California, they argue, he's unfit to lead the country. Ultimately, the anger from Rogan, Gibson, and others reflects a deeper frustration with a state they believe has lost its way. California's natural beauty, economic potential, and cultural influence should make it a leader, but instead, it's grappling with crises that seem intractable under current leadership. The call to vote Newsom out isn't just about one man, it's a demand for accountability, competence, and a return to governance that prioritizes people over politics. Whether this criticism translates into political change remains to be seen, but the voices of discontent are loud and unrelenting. For now, California remains a flashpoint for debates about leadership, policy, and the future of the American dream.